What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. You knew it had to happen. The Sinnoh region is one of my favorites for many reasons, not the least of which being it was the first full Pokémon experience that I got to do after a long wait from the very beginning of the series. And I'm sure appreciation for this region will continue to climb, as we're in the midst of Sinnoh hype with the remakes being on the way, and a brand new type of Pokémon game which seems to have made everyone excited. But with all of the new things that Sinnoh brought being on the DS, one thing that remains is the persistence of single-typed Pokémon. Once again, we see that a slim majority of Pokémon, at 51% introduced in this generation, are in fact just one type. So let's look through each of those and try to determine what they could gain if they had to pick up a secondary type. But I will acknowledge that it doesn't always work out, so we will rate our picks on probability. But do please let me know your own thoughts if you can come up with them on your own time. So, right at the top we have our Grass-type starter, Turtwig, being a pure Grass-type, along with its middle stage, Grotle. Now this might seem obvious, but I'm going with Ground. Of course, this does stem from Torterra being the final outcome of these Pokémon, and being a pretty great Pokémon all around. Despite the pairing's weaknesses, I do like the offensive advantages it provides. Grotle especially seems like it could naturally be a ground type, but there are dex entries telling of Turtwig's shell being made out of soil, so it seems plausible for each one of them. I'm going to give it 2.5 stars, just because they don't all need to be ground, but it's still good fun. Next is Chimchar, and despite the last one, I don't think giving the base form of this energetic monkey the fighting type really works. I'm still not convinced that Monferno is sufficiently fighting enough anyway. So I'm going to have to go with normal. I mean, what else could you do with such a simple monkey? I know that's not the cool option, but honestly, I'm not crazy about this line anyway, but I'll just give it half a star because it could happen, but we don't really need it. Now for my favorite starter overall with Piplup. This adorable penguin, as well as its controversial evolution Prinplup, are both pure water. And even though Empoleon has a great unique combination in water and steel, these earlier forms aren't really that metallic. So while flying could be appropriate, I think ice would be the best fit. Penguins are synonymous with the cold. Besides, it would not only be a nice change of pace to have an ice type available so early on in the game, but going from those extra weaknesses to an overabundance of resistances, I think would be a nice arc to have. So I'll go ahead and say that Piplup should have been given this distinction as a starter. Then there's the ever memeable Beedoof, and I think we'll have to go with the ground type. Not really. I think we'll finally break from that pattern here. And initially I was again simply adding the water type like its evolution, but it does make sense. It too lives and functions in the water, as we've seen extensively in Snap, so I think it's worth at least 2 stars to differentiate this rodent right from the start. Now with the regional bug of Kricketot and Kricketune, since there's still no sound type, we'll have to look elsewhere. Kricketune does have wings, but I don't think flying would work. Honestly, I think the steel type might be our best option here. It is worth noting once again that in doing this exercise, we are not changing anything about the Pokémon themselves. That being said, we do not definitively know what Kricketot's antennae are made of. There are Pokédex entries claiming that they clack together to sound like a xylophone, and Kricketune has literal swords for arms. So who's to say that Mustache isn't like a wire brush? I think that fits for a 1.5 stars, at the very least making Kricketot able to take a few hits and finally put that bite attack to good use. And then of course we come to the infamous Shanks line. While beloved, this family of Pokémon has long been described as needing the Dark type. And maybe it wouldn't make a strategic difference, but these Lightning Lynxes could definitely pull off the edgy Dark typing. Even little Shanks can have significant attitude at times, so I will indeed give 3 shining stars. Now, I always forget that Budew is part poison as well, so we move on to the only fossil that is a single type with the Rampardos line. And to me, it only makes sense to give them the Dragon type. These headstrong dinosaurs could certainly benefit from the added power behind the mythical type. But their monotyped distinction does make them unique from all of the other resurrected Pokémon, so I'll just give it 1 star. We then have Burme, and we know that I don't really care about this line, but Burme is a pure bug type for some reason. It's really not that hard, we just include the type changes that its evolution gets right from the beginning. making 1 grass, 1 ground, and 1 steel. It makes sense, but I also don't want to give Burme any more focus than it already has, so I'll just give it 1 star. Now we have Pachirisu, and honestly this one is pretty tough. To date, this will be the last Pikachu clone that we'll see, since they started giving them extra types to distinguish them. But it's a lot harder with this standard Squirrel. But I think I'm going to go with the ground type. Is it just because this is a landlocked version and the other is a flying Squirrel? Well, no, but Pachirisu is fairly terrestrial, so I think it could be applicable for maybe just 1 star. Then there's the Weasel line, which is honestly one of my favorites in the field of water types. But what else could these aquatic weasels use? Really just about the only thing that I can see working is in fact normal, because they do seem to be plain mammals that just so happen to live in the water. It does in fact fit, but they don't need it, especially since we've already got Bibarel covering that in Sinnoh, so while it could work, I would prefer they stay as they are, so I'll just use 1 star. Next is the underwhelming Cherrum line, so what could we give them? Well, I'm thinking fire, since Cherrum can blossom impressively when in direct sunlight. I'm not sure that would hold up as well with the creepy 2-headed first stage, but honestly, there's nothing that I think would work with some stale berries, so I'll say no stars for Cherubi, but once again the chance to get a grass and fire type is too good to ignore, so 3 stars there. There's also Shellos, and it would probably be easy enough to give it ground like its evolutions, based on its moves and lore, but I'm going to shift to the bug type. These Pokemon are just slugs, shown to have a ridiculously flexible body, so I think once again, bug could be appropriate, and let us actually use it in the region at some point, so I'll give it 1 star. Ambipong comes next, and I wasn't quite sure that I should follow suit with Fairy that we gave to Apom before, but it has grown on me. Not every fairy type has to be so cuddly, and in fact it would be great to have another physical-leaning attacker for the fairy type, so I'll give it at least 2 stars. Then there's the Baniri line, and this is another that I'm going to split up. I'm going to give Baniri the fairy type as well, since it just screams fairy, but for Lopunny I will give the fighting type. I know that its Mega has this, but even without that, I think this rabbit could lull in foes just to strike when they least expect it. So I'll give these ones 1.5 stars, since I don't find it crucial to their relevance. The mystical Mismagius is also a pure ghost type, but in the pattern of breaking from previous stages, I'm going to recommend adding Psychic this time. This Pokemon can learn a ton of Psychic-type moves, and it's also been described as causing terrifying visions or headaches with its curses, so I think that's sufficient support for this stance. Plus, it's not a bad typing, so I'll go ahead and say that it's worth a good 2.5 stars. Then there's the requisite cat Pokemon with the Glameow line, and I think we can pretty convincingly give them the Dark type. Glameow itself is clearly plotting some atrocity at any given moment with that smirk, but Purugly is just clearly flat out evil. It's one of the signature Pokemon of Team Galactic after all, and we know how evil they were, so I think it could fit pretty well, but I'll only give it 2 stars since the combination itself isn't really that great. Then there's the Pokemon that I forget the most with Xingling. And for this Psychic type, I will be going with Steel. With its evolution, Flying fit best, but for this baby form, it's just a tiny bell hopping all over the place. Plus, it would probably do Xingling some good to have all of those extra resistances added, that way people might actually give it a shot, since Psychic and Steel is a pretty great typing. So I'll throw Xingling a bone and say that it should have been this way at 3 stars. And since most of Sinnoh's baby Pokemon are close together, we have Bonsly, who once again I'll say should get the grass typing. I know that the joke is that it's not, but it's also literally a bonsai tree, so I think it could work it out to get a pretty solid typing, and like its evolution, I'll give it 2.5 stars. And since Mime Jr. already got itself the fairy typing, that leads us to Hapini, who, wouldn't you know it, should also get the fairy type. Seriously, I've said this for each of the other entries in the family, but especially here when no one was going to use it for battle anyway, why not go ahead and make this thing truly happy and let it be a fairy type at 3 stars? Then there's Munchlax, and while I gave Snorlax fighting, I don't really see that working here. Munchlax is far too jolly for that sort of thing, so I'll opt for the ground type. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure what else to use for this nondescript cat bear thing, but I do think power over the earth could work at maybe just 1 star. and of course another baby form in Riolu. But I will firmly put my foot down and say no Steel type here. Tiny bumps on the forearms do not constitute a whole new type. So really the only thing I see working is Normal, just because of how baseline this Pokemon is, but it's not really a help, so we'll just leave it as is. Then there's the Hippodon line, and honestly this one was pretty hard. These hippos are so inextricably linked to the ground type in every way. I'll just say rock or something since we're not going to change anything about them, but we'll just leave these ones alone as well, no stars. Carnivane is next, and this Pokemon is a bit of an enigma. With so much going on, maybe it should be flying due to Levitate? But I'm thinking maybe Poison could be the best. After all, the plant on which it is based famously dissolves its prey, so I think giving this oversized Flytrap some acidic attacks would fit for at least 1 star. Finneon and Lumineon are utterly forgettable, and part of that is probably because they're just pure water types. So how can we spruce them up? Well, I would say the flying type. After all, these fish are deliberately patterned after butterflies with their fins. This, combined with the fact that they can learn a surprising number of flying-type moves for some random sea dwellers, makes me say that we should give these ones 2 stars. Now we finally get down to the bulk of evolutionary add-ons late in the dex, and Licky is the first single-typed one. And like its previous stage from Kanto, I think I'll give it the dragon typing. There's not much else to this rotund reptile, so dragon is about all we can do. Now, I'll give it 2 stars just so we can move on from this sad sack of a Pokemon. Similarly, we have Tangroth, who is a bigger, bulkier version of the one from before. As for what type to give this bundle of vines, I'll probably go with Dark again. Some people suggested Rock due to its evolution method, and hey, those vines have to be wrapped around something, but Tangroth can get access to so many Dark-type moves, and can still be hiding any nefarious thing under there, we just don't know. But I'll give this one only a half a star, barely above the last time. There's also the imposing Electivire, who I think is indeed deserving of the fighting type. I would say that even more so than its previous forms, and I'll go ahead and give 3 stars to anything that makes Electivire even more intimidating. I did have more trouble with Magmortar though. I've been going with Poison for the other stages, but I don't think it fits as well here. I'm going to say Rock because of how this Pokemon seems tied to molten rock beneath the earth, and it seems to share those arm cannons with Rhyperior, so it's not quite as perfect as its counterpart, but I guess I could see it at maybe just 1 star. Once again, we find some evolutions in this region with Leafeon and Glaceon, who are obviously pure grass and ice respectively. What more could they be? Well, that's a bit trickier. I'm thinking maybe ground for Leafeon, since if nothing else, it could help explain the lack of green that we were all expecting. And for Glaceon, I'm thinking maybe steel. I wasn't expecting it, but the jagged shapes that jut out from the steely blue Pokemon seem sharp enough to maybe warrant some extra metal being added. Ultimately, I think Leafeon could get away with 2 stars, but Glaceon will probably only get a half. We then find the corrupted computer program of Porygon Z, and I'm tempted to once again use the Steel type, but this time I will actually lean towards Electric. The difference this time is that the CGI duck has a glitch that has taken over its systems, so I imagine the electronics here would be given more of an emphasis. So I'll go ahead and throw it up to a 3 stars just like the other ones. The creepy Dusknoir is next, and I thought about Electric here too because of the antenna on its head that picks up ghost radio waves and tells it who to abduct, but really I think that just means it has to be a Dark type. The other ones in this line were given this too, but I think it fits much better here, so I will upgrade it to 2 stars this time because boy can this thing be scary. Now we get into Legend territory with the Lake Guardians. These pure Psychic types should probably just be Fairy type. Actually, I'm not sure why they weren't added onto them later. I mean, they're literally named after pixies, sprites, and elves, so they seem pretty down for being a fairy. And I'll give them a good 2.5 stars. Then there's the Regimaster, one Mr. Reginald Gigas. Being pure normal is kind of a drag, so what can we do? Well, while the shrubs all over him does imply grass, I think we'll go with fighting. This improves the power of a good portion of his moveset, and gives him an actual advantage over the other golems from Hoenn, who mostly resisted him before. There's also still the ones from the Galar region, I guess, but nobody's perfect. Honestly, Reggiegis needs all the help it can get, so 3 stars away and get this man something useful. There's also Cresselia, who is another pure psychic type, and I really didn't want to give it the fairy type because I think that's kind of boring and predictable, but just look at the thing. And fairies have been shown to be in connection with the moon before, so it's probably at least 2 begrudging stars. Now we have the useless Fione, who I would actually give the bug type. Its origins stem from quite a strange sea creature that may not be an insect per se, but certainly bears similar attributes. As for its superior parent, I think I'll say psychic. This ocean master doesn't really have much muscle, so they have to rely on more ethereal powers. Plus, its signature Heart Swap is a psychic move anyway. I'll give these both 1 star apiece. The ominous Darkrai is next, and people have long been confused about it being a ghost type or not. Obviously the name isn't Ghostrai, but you've got to admit it's got some otherworldly qualities, so you'd be forgiven for thinking it was in fact a departed specter. It fits really well, but I won't say that it needed it, so it'll just eke out at 2.5 stars. Shaman comes next in line, and while its sky form is predictably flying, the base form is still solidly grass. And while it is very cute and cuddly, I think maybe it could get away with the ground type? It is incredibly small, and maybe the tiniest legs in the Pokémon world. After all, it is basically just a shrub, and it would further highlight the differences between its forms. It's just a coincidence that it also happens to be in the one region with a grass and ground starter as well, but I'll give it 2 stars. And of course, finally, we come to the creator of the Pokémon universe with the totally undisputed name, Arceus. And this one is super hard because this is legitimately the first time a Pokémon could conceivably be every type. Arceus' whole shtick is turning itself into all of the different types, so could we get away with having an every-typed Pokémon? If ever we could, it would be with this one. But so as not to overcomplicate things, I guess I'll just settle on Fairy. I can see it having that mythic quality, but there's also the whole thing with the Z-Crystals. Basically, Arceus can use the Z-Crystals to change type just like the plates, except for Fairy. So this would help to rectify that disparity, but that's probably not even worth half a star for this llama god. Maybe we'll see a primal form in the new games or something. But those are all of the extra typings that I would give to make all of the Sinnoh Pokémon dual-typed. It's interesting how a region sets itself apart, since now it seems that once again Ground and Fairy had more uses this time, and Steel had a much stronger showing than I expected. But let me know what types you would use down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!